Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a frontline update for the Ukraine war for the 27th of October 2023. Please excuse any loud bangs and noises. I have workmen banging away upstairs, so to speak. Anyway, this is the map. As you can see, not a lot of change over the last 24 hours, just a few pins in the Avdiivka area, but we'll have a little look, see what's happened nonetheless. If we go to the ISW, American military think tank, that gives us an indication of some activity in the Kupiansk area. Geolocated footage published on the 26th indicates that Russian forces made marginal advances southwest of Liman Pershi. Where is that? Well, we have Kupiansk to Svatova to Kremina there. Liman Pershi is just north or northeast of Kupiansk, which is down here. We have Liman Pershi around there. We have some footage here that suggests artillery units of the 3rd Separate Tank Iron Brigade, together with aerial reconnaissance, inflicted fire damage on enemy equipment, the occupiers' block post and the enemy's manpower, the occupiers' block post and the enemy's manpower. So here we have a location around Liman Pershi. So Ukrainian 3rd Tank Brigade shelling the Russians here. So this is where the Russians are, and we'll plug that in to our lovely map, and it will show that the Russians are there. So as according to Andrew Perpetua, that would suggest the Russians are further forward from his lines, but behind the lines of Surat Maps, a pro-Russian mapper. Indeed, for those who don't know the what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the screen now. Pause the video. So that could be an advance for the Russians, as according to at least Andrew Perpetua, but well within the pro-Russian mapper there. So yeah, okay, there's that activity. As we come further down, a Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces made unspecified marginal advances west of Svatova. So this is in the area, well, unknown, it's a bit vague there, but you've got Svatova there. It's likely in this general area of Nadia, Novoherivka, Ryorodka, where the Russians have made some fairly significant gains and then have been pushed back, and it's a little bit of a stalemate at the moment. They've advanced near Makivka, and Sinkivka and Kislivka. So these are Russian claims that a number of places, Kislivka, Sinkivka, Makivka down here as well. Lots of Ivkas for you. The Russians may have advanced, but again, that's not unusual for them to make those claims without any evidence to back them up. Ukrainian Ground Force Command spokesperson Fityo stated yesterday that the size of the Russian force grouping in the Kupiansk and Liman directions remains the same at roughly 100,000 personnel, because Russian forces have committed additional reserves to degraded units in Ukraine. I mean, I don't know what that really means. The idea is that there are 100,000 people or so in this general area here. But as I keep saying, that's not necessarily meaning they are frontline troops doing all sorts of different things in that area. There are quite a few training facilities in the Luhansk region, and that would those numbers would constitute some of that 100,000. But anyway, we'll move on to Bakhmut, where there has been very little advances from either side. The ISW says geolocated footage published yesterday indicates that Russian forces advanced south of Ozaryanivka. Okay, where's that? Well, we have Bakhmut itself here. We've got the northern area here, and then south of Bakhmut we have the canal and the railway line. So the canal's over here, the railway line is here, where we have Klishivka and Andriivka. And then as we come down to Kurdyamivka and Ozaryanivka, we have seen recently the Ukrainians make advances, but then further down to the south of Ozaryanivka, there were some claims of Russian advances in this tree line just on the canal as it gets closer to the railway line in this area. So haven't seen too much activity around Ozaryanivka for some time. So anyway, we'll see what this amounts to. Here we have mortar shelling of Russians south of Ozaryanivka. We'll see where the Russians are there. And that is, if I can plug it in, that gives us Russians at this position, which is pretty much where the advances were, as according to Andrew Perpetua. So that seems to be fairly correct in what he claims of that very localized advance. So the ISW is giving us some pretty good information there. Russian sources claim that Russian forces marginally advanced near Vasyukivka. Vasyukivka is to the north of Bakhmut. So as we come up past Dubova-Vasilivka, Orikova-Vasilivka, Zalizhnyansky, and there's supposed to be some fighting still around the E40 highway or the M03 highway coming into the north of Bakhmut. I don't know how I know where all these places are. Well, I do. I've been doing this for a year and a half. Vasyukivka is up here where, the Russians are claiming some marginal advances. A Russian mail blogger claimed that Russian forces attacked and occupied the heights northeast of Kromova as well. So Kromova is this village just on the, western outskirts of Bakhmut towards the north here as the 00506 highway comes in. That's that grand line of communication. So there's some heights around here. There we did see yesterday some successes around the Rosali area. That could be what the ISW is referring to there. Right, that is broadly Bakhmut done already, just not a lot of information coming out, or at least no changes. Still probably some fairly heavy fighting going on, particularly south of Bakhmut. We come back to Avdiivka, which is the heaviest area of fighting at the moment. The Russians have had quite a lot of success, although at huge costs to them, around Krasnohorivka as they push towards and over this railway line, but also push from the slag heap towards the coke plant in the northern outskirts of Avdiivka there. And that's quite a close run thing there, not only in terms of the success of the Russians, but also the proximity of this place. I mean, it isn't far for the Russians to get across that railway line there and attack the buildings of the coke plant. Well, the ISW says of the area, Russian sources claimed yesterday and the day before that Russian forces continue advancing near the waste heap of Avdiivka, the slag heap, and are successfully defending their positions there. The Ukrainian reserve officer stated on the 25th that Russian forces can only use those positions occasionally and temporarily, and that neither Russian nor Ukrainian forces fully control the waste heap, although that was 2 days ago. I would think they probably do, but it's not the sort of place you want to be walking across just to get from one side to the other. It's obviously quite difficult to get up there, and I don't think the Russians have any need to be up there. They might place a few sort of mortar teams and whatnot, but the tunnels underneath might well be more useful for moving from one side into the other. Okay, the Ukrainian reserve officer, said that already. Stupin, so he's the spokesperson for the Ukrainians, stated on the 25th and 6th that Russian forces from other directions are replacing Russian battalions that have suffered losses in the Avdiivka area, and that Storm Z prisoner detachments are refusing to conduct combat operations and are abandoning positions near Avdiivka. That's significant if true. We have heard of some rather large mutinies and desertions of late. A Russian mail blogger claimed on the 26th yesterday that Russian forces have fire control over 90% of Ukrainian ground lines of communications in the Avdiivka area. The ISW, though, has not observed any indications that this is true, but you can imagine they will have something to say about this road that comes in here. I mean, all of these areas are within artillery range of the Russians, so it is, I guess, trivially true. I say trivially because that's been the case for a long time. If you're thinking, okay, so let's say the Russians have a reduced range of, say, 20 kilometers. Well, okay, that's 30 kilometers. The Russians can put some artillery there and still have some success in striking Russian positions. They can put self-propelled mortars a lot closer, still do damage to the ground lines of communication there. So I guess that is probably true, and that's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. It's a bit of a runner gauntlet, rather like the G-locks into Bakhmut at the height of that offensive. So a Russian source claimed that Ukrainian forces counterattacked near Avdiivka in the direction of Spartak on the 26th, but did not specify an outcome. This might be in reference to the counterattack that did happen there. Some gains made, as according to Deep State map, by the Ukrainians pushing the pushing the Russians back. So the Russians are down here. Deep State map has a very different line to both Andrew Perpetua and Syriac maps that has the Russians up and towards this forest area north of Spartak, south of Avdiivka, the main city. So let's have a look at a couple of the sources. Now, this is significant if true. This is Syriac maps showing possibly one of the biggest gains I've seen for a long time in a single day. Situation north of Donetsk airport. So this is Opitny onto Vodyane. Between the two, Russian army restarted the advances in this axis by taking control over the quarry and the tree lines northwest and north of Opitny. In addition, troops advanced north of Spartak and took control over some trenches. So here is, I don't know if I've done that on my map. I did the mapping today and I haven't reflected that. So took control over some trenches southeast of the abandoned military base. Okay, that would indicate, let's have a look, some gains for the Russians. Just trying to get my bearings here. Okay, so it could well be in this area, just around there, some gains for the Russians. Although that might look to be similar to what Andrew Perpetua already has, so it could be more of a rejig than anything else. So that's in this area there. As I say, Andrew Perpetua already has that, and Deep State map pretty much half has that. So it might not be anything that happened yesterday, but something that has happened previously, and Syriac maps is getting onto that. But what's more significant, I think, is these purported gains. I've not seen these anywhere else. There's a big difference, as you can see from the mappers, between the mappers here. Syriac maps has this whole area being gained here. It really is significant. Including the quarry that we were talking about yesterday that we know that's fighting over. So it could well be possible, plausible even, that this has happened, and other mappers may catch up with that, or it's Syriac maps being overconfident in some of the claims. Go back to the ISW. No, there's nothing else to mention here. We'll look at some of the geolocated claims. This is where we go south to Novomerkylivka. So actually, that's Avdiivka at the moment. It's quieter than it was in terms of the activity. Or the news of the activity. It might not actually be quieter, but news of any gains, there's nothing coming out of there the last 24 hours in this Stepova area and by the coke plant, but certainly something that I think the Ukrainians will be fighting really hard over. They don't want to have the neck closed here. But the same will be said about what's going on down here, coming out of Vodyane and Opitny too. Either way, is a threat. And if it's both happening at the same time, then double whammy. But yeah, that's Avdiivka. As I said yesterday, it's definitely one to watch, being, I think, on a little bit of a knife edge for the Ukrainians. They have exacted a huge cost on the Russians, but the Russians aren't so concerned about those costs as long as they get the kilometers, and they are very slowly doing that. Right, and then we're going to come down to Novomerkylivka here, which is south of Mariinka. We have the ISW saying geolocated footage published yesterday indicates that Russian forces advanced southeast of Novomerkylivka. Right, okay, so what's happened? Well, the tank basically, Shadow Drone Group observes a Russian tank with a mine roller plow through minefields until ultimately getting damaged and abandoned southeast of Novomerkylivka. I don't think this indicates that it is controlled Russian lands, or that its advance is in the way that you might interpret that. So I would say they've advanced southeast, which means that their whole front line would advance, rather than this actually being into the grey zone, a single tank trying to plow through some minefields and then eventually getting taken out, which is what that is. That the tank previously reached very close to Novomykolivka itself, we'll see where this geolocation is. But you'll see when I show you on Andrew Perpetua's map as well. Right. Oh, come on, fingers. Oh, it's the old triple click, then goes on to next click. Goodness me. Right, anyway, as you can see, that is really quite close to Novomykolivka, and that's made a significant advance from the Russian lines. When we look at Andrew Perpetua's claims here, he has the longest arrow I've seen him give, suggesting that actually this has gone an awful long way from the Russian defensive lines through the grey zone and then reaching a position where it ultimately ends. And that doesn't necessarily, at least according to him, signify that they have advanced in terms of controlled land. But given the shelling you can see there, it is still, I think, safe to say that the area is a grey zone. The tank has progressed up until a point, but they don't control that ground, I don't think. So I think Andrew Perpetua is right in saying that. But you can see that the grey zone is therefore getting much closer to Novomykolivka, which is a town that has had some serious attention from Russian aviation. The VKS have littered this area with FAB 500 bombs. All of these settlements, Paraskevivka and Konstantinivka, another Konstantinivka there, being given close attention from the Russians. So anyway, that is Novomykolivka. I don't think the ISW says anything particularly relevant to what we need to know. Here we come along to the Velika Novosilka area. Stupin, who is the spokesperson, stated that the Russian forces suffered heavy losses and withdrew after attacking Volodina on October the 24th. Russian mill bloggers claimed on the 25th and 6th that they marginally advanced north and northeast of Priyutne. So Priyutne is this area there where it appears that the Russians have had some success, but the Ukrainians have also had some success as well. And then attacking towards Volodina. I need to get my bearings. So the Ukrainians here claiming that the Russians attacked near Volodina. I mean, that near there could be anywhere along here, but we did have, as I mentioned, some success of the Ukrainian near Priyutne there, but successes for the Russians here. And then Russians retreating back after taking heavy losses, attacking towards somewhere near Volodina. So yeah. Anyway, as we come to the west, we come back to Robotina sector, and we see again that there's no real changes to the front line there. The ISW says much of what they've kind of said for the last 3 or 4 days, really. Ukrainian forces have slowed the tempo of their offensive operations in western Zaporizhia Oblast due to poor weather. I forgot to mention this morning, because I often forget this is an important variable, but where there were much lower numbers of equipment lost and personnel lost yesterday, that could well be a reflection of the weather situation. Neither the Ukrainian nor the Russian artillery are actively firing due to poor visibility. But there you go. Attacks and counterattacks around this whole area, but no changes to the front line. And then we come down to the Kherson region, where there's a few sources mentioning this area, but no changes to the mapping as of yet. No report says near Pidstepny on the left bank, Russians are now systematically hit in their dugouts. Ukrainian forces, it says, have increased their presence in the area, and here we see footage of Russians being hit in dugouts. I won't show it to you, but that's in the Pidstepny area, just to let you know where that is. If you come down to Oleshki, the Antonivsky Bridge, the Russians have been pressured along near Poima, Pishkanivka, and Pishchanivka, yep, and Pidstepny here. So somewhere around the Pidstepny area, they are getting hit in those dugouts. You can see that it's much more sandy area around here, which is reflected in that video, the kind of terrain that the Russians are operating in. And here we have Astraya Intel saying enemy mill bloggers report the arrival of additional Ukrainian reinforcements on the left bank of the Dnipro. Ukrainian presence in Krinky remains. The Russian quote is, the tense situation at Krinky remains. The enemy today was actively transferring reinforcements to the left bank by boats in the Pidstepny area where we've just been. Aerial reconnaissance identified groups trying to gain a foothold along the road. That probably would be this road here, where they do seem to have some presence by Pidstepny. And as we come further on past Kozachi Lahiri, we come to Krinky, where Surveyor map still indicates a more favourable situation for the Ukrainians there, with the Russians much further back than, say, Andrew Perpetua's mapping. He has the Russians pushed back only minorly, where there was some drone footage probably a week ago now, some time ago. There's not been too much evidence of Ukrainians pushing on past these lines. Here we do have something though. Ukrainian positions on the left bank of Dnipro bombed by Russian drone. Here the geolocation is, we have a couple of geolocations. We'll put the first one in, and that didn't like that typically, just when you want it to behave. And now, whoops, this is back to Pidstepny area, so it appears that, yep, along that road part where Andrew Perpetua has his and indeed Surrey maps have their lines further to the south. That for the Russian defensive line, that makes sense. Ukrainians are operating there. We'll plug in the second one, see if it gives us anything particularly interesting, anything different, but probably there or thereabouts. And that is, just up the road there. So 2 points on the road where the Ukrainians are definitely, or have definitely been, and that shows that indeed they do have a foothold, or at least have had a foothold there recently. So that's Kherson as according to those sources. If we come down to the ISW, geolocated footage published on October the 25th shows that Ukrainian forces marginally advanced north of Pidstepny. That's what I've just showed you. Russian mill bloggers continue to claim that Ukrainian forces, maintain positions in Krinky, and that Ukrainian forces continue to transfer small groups and reinforcements to the area, as the sources I've shown you also say. They're probably the same sources there. So not too much change there. That seems pretty much what we knew yesterday, and that can broadly be extrapolated across the front line. A much quieter day. Weather might have something to do with that, but I get a sense that there's a sort of a culmination going on. We've maybe got a transfer of momentum. I don't know though going forward whether the Russians would have enough in the tank really for any kind of significant pressure, a sustained pressure along large parts of the front line. They may be pushing in Avdiivka, but I don't know they could simultaneously push in the northeastern axis and Bakhmut and everywhere else. I think they might pick and choose a couple of places. As we've seen from activity along the northeastern axis, they've got enough to just make a few inroads here and there, but then that usually seems to run out of steam, and the Ukrainians are able to counter attack, or at least bring in defenses to stop the Russian advances. And that's been the case in a number of these places, although they might make incremental gains here and there, such as we've seen particularly around the Kupiansk down to Kislivka area. All along here, the Russians have put the Ukrainians under pressure, but it's not a case of being able, I don't think, at least not being able to very quickly get to the Oskil River and make the huge gains that I think they would really like, the Russians. So I don't know. It's an interesting point. As I said this morning, I think the Ukrainians have probably got more reserves built up in the Kherson area, because I think they were getting ready to do a pincer attack if they had succeeded in the Robotyne area, the Zaporizhia sector, and they'd sort of come down there to Tokmak towards Melitopol, and they would have pushed across the river here as well in a larger pincer movement. But with their forces getting bogged down and unable to progress quickly in the Zaporizhia direction, and a slight change of tactics in what they started doing, and instead of moving in terms of combined arms maneuvers, they sat back and attrited the Russian equipment from using distance munitions. And I think that meant that the forces around the Kherson area might have been sort of twiddling their thumbs a bit, and then they thought eventually, no, we do have the ability to cause the Russians some problems around here, and that's what they're doing. And so they probably do have the reserves to dip into in the Kherson region. So this might be an area where we see more Ukrainian gains, more initiative and momentum than we see elsewhere on the front line at the moment. But let me know what you think. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.